The morning Ethan Marlowe disappeared was the kind of gray, damp Seattle dawn that blurred the edges of everything. Rooftops, memories, even breath. The rain had begun before sunrise, tapping softly against the windows of the house he no longer believed was his. The living room smelled of last night's leftover wine, the faint trace of Clara's perfume drifting through the hallway from the bedroom upstairs. Ethan stood by the kitchen counter, motionless, staring at the folded sheet of paper beneath his hand. His fingertips brushed the edge as though memorizing its outline. He had rewritten the letter 3 times, once in fury, once in grief, once in a quiet, steady honesty that frightened him more than either. It was that version he left behind. He wasn't shaking, he wasn't crying, he wasn't even angry anymore. What remained was an exhaustion, so deep it felt like silence had taken root inside him. He picked up his keys, slid the hood of his jacket over his dark hair, and for a moment, just one glance back toward the staircase where Clara still slept. A shadow of something crossed his face. It could have been sorrow. It could have been relief. Then he walked out. The door closed with a softness he knew she would never hear. Clara woke 2 hours later to the unpleasant thrum of a headache and the empty space beside her. The sheets were cold. She reached blindly for her phone, expecting a text from Ethan saying he'd gone for an early run or left for the office. He wasn't the type to leave without a note, or so she believed. She slipped out of bed, the hardwood cool beneath her feet, when she saw the letter on the kitchen counter. Plain. Folded once, her name written in Ethan's careful handwriting. Her stomach tightened. "Ethan," she called, peering around the corner as though he might simply emerge from the hallway. "Are you home?" Silence. The kind that isn't peaceful, but wrong. She reached for the letter, hesitant. The handwriting was steady. Too steady. She felt an unease she couldn't explain. The kind that made her chew her bottom lip, the way she used to during high school exams. For a long moment, she just stared, unable to open it. 3 nights earlier, Ethan had watched her through the living room window as she stepped out of a rideshare and lingered on the sidewalk. She had been smiling down at her phone, the kind of soft, unguarded smile she no longer reserved for him. When she walked inside, brushing past him with the faint scent of expensive cologne that wasn't his, Ethan had said nothing. He had learned over the past year the sharpness of words unspoken. The evidence had come slowly. The late-night meetings, the canceled weekends, the messages she shielded with her palm. Ethan was not naive. He had seen the shift long before the truth presented itself plainly. But the night he followed her, unplanned, uncharacteristic, still somehow inevitable, was the night something inside him quietly broke. He hadn't meant to trail her car downtown. He hadn't meant to park across from the glass-fronted restaurant. He certainly hadn't meant to see Clara's boss, Julian Keaton, touch her face the way Ethan once did, when they were young and didn't yet know how people grow apart. Clara had laughed. Soft, private, familiar, before Julian leaned in and kissed her. Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. The rain blurred the windshield, turning shapes into smears of color. In those 30 seconds, he felt himself disappear from his own life. When he finally drove away, he left behind whatever was left of the man he had been with her. Standing alone in the kitchen now, Clara unfolded the letter with trembling fingers. The first sentence stole the air from her lungs. "Clara, if you're reading this, it means I finally accepted that we are no longer standing on the same side of our marriage." Her heart hammered. She read on. "I'm not leaving because of what I saw. I'm leaving because of everything that came before it. The silences, the distances, the nights you didn't come home, and the mornings you couldn't look me in the eye." Her vision blurred. She blinked hard. "I want you to know that I loved you. Deeply. Quietly. Sometimes too quietly, perhaps. Maybe you mistook my steadiness for complacency. Maybe I mistook your restlessness for ambition. A tear slid down her cheek before she could stop it. I'm not angry at you. I'm not taking anything from the house. I'm not asking for explanations. I only want you to have the life you've been reaching for. And I need to find the version of myself that doesn't disappear in someone else's shadow. Clara covered her mouth, shaking. You don't have to look for me. By the time you read this, I'll be somewhere, starting over. Somewhere I can breathe again. Take care of yourself. Clara. Ethan. When she finished, her knees buckled and she slid to the kitchen floor, clutching the letter to her chest like it was burning her. Because, in a way, it was. It took her a full minute before she realized she was whispering his name, as if saying it aloud might bring him back. But Ethan Marlowe was already gone, and she had no idea where to find him. In the beginning. Ethan and Clara Marlowe were the kind of couple people looked at and felt a tug of longing. Two young professionals navigating Seattle's damp charm with a certainty that love once chosen would be enough. They laughed easily, then fell asleep tangled together, whispered dreams of a small house near the water. And maybe a dog someday. Their friends used to joke that they were ridiculously compatible, like two pieces of a puzzle that had snapped into place the moment they met. But the truth was simpler. They loved each other in that wholehearted, unguarded way people often do in their 20s, when future cracks still hide beneath soft light and hopeful plans. In those early years, Clara would come home from work buzzing with stories, clients who adored her campaigns that took off, coworkers who became her second family. Ethan used to listen with genuine interest, his hands still stained with pencil smudges from the architectural studio where he spent his days sketching small, forgotten building into something beautiful. He admired her ambition. She admired his steadiness. They didn't know yet that these two traits, hers blazing outward, his rooted inward, were the very threads that would begin pulling them apart. The shift was subtle at first. Clara's firm took on a major account, and she was put under the direct supervision of Julian Keaton, a charismatic executive with a reputation for turning brands from unknown to untouchable. Julian was charming in a practiced, effortless way. He had a smile like a camera flash and an aura that made rooms tilt toward him. People said he could sell water to the ocean. Clara, already driven, began to orbit that gravity. Late-night brainstorming sessions became normal. Weekend work calls became necessary. Ethan didn't complain. He understood deadlines, pressure, ambition. He was proud of her, at least at the start. But as months passed, those nights multiplied. She'd stumble through the door at 11 p.m., smelling of expensive wine and designer cologne, tossing her heels aside with a tired laugh. "You're still up?" she would ask. "Yeah," Ethan would say, closing his laptop, even though he'd been hoping she'd come home early for once. "We had a dinner with clients," she'd add, already scrolling through her phone. Julian insisted. She never noticed the small pause before Ethan replied. She never noticed how often he swallowed the questions he wanted to ask. Meanwhile, Ethan's own work began expanding. His firm landed a renovation project on an old waterfront district, a dream assignment for an architect who loved history and quiet detail. But it required long nights at the drafting table, measuring, redesigning, creating worlds on paper. He tried to share it with Clara, showing her sketches, talking about the concept behind each facade. She listened, but distractedly. Her mind was already tangled in the rhythm of deadlines and Julian's relentless expectations. Sometimes she'd say, "I'm proud of you," without looking up from her screen. Sometimes she didn't say anything at all. They still slept in the same bed, but conversations shrank. Their schedules collided awkwardly, like trains running on tracks that used to align, but now drifted further apart with each passing month. The warm, hopeful beginning slowly cooled into a comfortable silence, then into an uncomfortable one. The first real crack came one Friday night. Ethan had cooked dinner. Pasta with roasted tomatoes, her favorite, thinking they might spend the evening together for the first time in weeks. But at 7 p.m., his phone buzzed. Running late. Don't wait. See. He stared at the message long after the screen dimmed. She came home past midnight, makeup faded, hair falling loose, laughter still lingering on her lips from whatever happened after work. She smelled distinctly of Julian's cologne, the same one Ethan had given him as a holiday gift box last year, when both couples still pretended friendship. "You ate?" she asked casually. "Yeah," he lied. She kissed his cheek absent-mindedly, missing the hollowed look in his eyes. That night, Ethan lay awake long after she drifted into sleep, her back turned to him, her body curled toward the edge of the bed as though reaching for a life he wasn't part of. Months passed like that, quiet fractures accumulating under the surface. Friends noticed the subtle changes first. At dinner parties, Clara found reasons not to attend, citing urgent work or client emergencies. Ethan went alone more often. When people asked about Clara, he smiled and explained she was busy, even though the words burned at the back of his throat. At home, Clara became a ghost who drifted between sleep, work, and the glow of her phone screen. She laughed more at her texts than at Ethan's jokes. She dressed differently, sleeker, sharper, more deliberate. Julian's influence seeped into her wardrobe, her speech, even the cadence of her stride. Ethan noticed everything, and the more he noticed, the quieter he became. The night he found the message was the night a part of him finally began to unravel. He wasn't snooping. Her phone had buzzed on the couch, lighting up with a preview that made his breath stop. "You're intoxicating. Last night is still in my head." Julian. The world didn't explode. It folded inward, quietly, like paper burned at the edges. Clara walked into the room seconds later, hair wet from the shower, humming softly. Ethan handed her the phone without a word. "You got a message," he said. She froze when she saw it. For a moment, Westman, he searched her face for denial, guilt, panic, something. What he saw instead was calculation. A quick flicker of fear followed by a smooth, practiced mask. "It's not what you think," she whispered. He said nothing because it was exactly what he thought. For a long, fragile minute, they stood in the living room, not as husband and wife, but as strangers sharing a secret shaped like a wound. Clara placed the phone on the coffee table and reached for him, but Ethan stepped back, not in anger, but in heartbreak. "I'm tired," he murmured, and walked upstairs. It was the last conversation they had about it. After that night, Ethan worked later than ever, burying himself in blueprints he could control, lines he could draw straight when everything else in his life bent and fractured. He came home when she was already asleep. She left before he woke. Their marriage dissolved into two separate lives, sharing a single address. But even then, under the weight of silence, betrayal, and distance, Ethan still loved her in a stubborn, quiet way. He didn't know then that love, too, can die softly. He didn't know he had already begun writing the first sentences of the letter that would one day make Clara collapse to her knees. He only knew something inside him was slipping away, and that one morning soon, he would slip away, too. The weeks following the incriminating text unfolded with an eerie, deliberate stillness, like a room where someone had shattered glass but swept the pieces beneath the rug, pretending nothing ever happened. Ethan moved through the house as though he were, trying not to disturb something fragile. Clara, sensing the change, adjusted her behavior with the quiet desperation of someone refusing to admit a truth already too loud to ignore. They lived together, but the air between them was different now. Dense, heavy, shaped by all the words Ethan didn't say. He noticed the affair everywhere, in places that once felt safe. In the way Clara kept her phone face down at dinner, even when she pretended she wasn't waiting for messages. In the sudden late-night strategy sessions with Julian, each one announced casually, with a tone too light as if rehearsed. In the small lies. So small, they almost sounded harmless. "I'm grabbing drinks with the team," she'd say, though. Ethan knew the team rarely stayed past 9 o'clock. "Julian just needs help prepping for Monday," she'd repeat, brushing lipstick onto lips that no longer kissed him goodnight. She lied with the ease of someone who convinced herself the lie wasn't really a lie. Someone who wanted the excuse more than the truth. Ethan absorbed each one quietly. He kept a mental list. Though he never meant to. The human heart does that. Catalogs pain, even when the mind begs it to forget. One night, he found a second message. He wasn't searching for it. Clara had left her laptop open on the kitchen island while grabbing a jacket before heading out. She was rushing. Always rushing. So she didn't see the new chat window pop up. "Can't stop thinking about Thursday. Same time next week. Jay." Ethan didn't touch the laptop. He only stared at the line of text glowing cruelly against the screen, illuminating the kitchen in a soft, poisonous blue. His breath didn't hitch. His hands didn't shake. Instead, a slow, searing numbness began to spread through his chest, as if something inside him had finally given up trying to be warm. When Clara returned moments later and shut the laptop with a quick clip motion, he didn't say anything. She didn't either. Silence became their mutual agreement. Clara, for her part, started noticing his distance. It wasn't dramatic. Ethan was never dramatic. It showed up in subtler ways. The way he didn't reach for her hand when they crossed the street. The way he no longer leaned in to kiss her temple in the morning. The way his once soft eyes had become still, unreadable pools. He listened to her, but without the spark that used to make her feel seen. He moved around her gently, carefully, like she was made of porcelain that might crack if he stepped too close. Clara didn't ask about it, because asking meant acknowledging what she already feared that Ethan knew. And Clara wasn't ready to face a world where her husband knew the truth and had gone quiet instead of fighting for her. His silence terrified her more than any confrontation. Confrontation meant anger, emotion, maybe even hope for repair. Silence meant retreat, withdrawal, a slow, final unraveling. So, she chose denial, a familiar and comforting refuge. She pretended he was stressed with work, pretended he was distracted, pretended everything was temporary. But deep down, in the quiet moments between meetings, or in the backseat of late-night Lyft rides, she felt the truth gnawing at her. Something in Ethan had changed in a way that might never change back. One evening, Ethan came home early. He stood by the window, watching rain smear the city into a watercolor of lights. Clara walked in at nearly 10 o'clock, drenched but glowing from yet another client dinner. Her cheeks flushed, her hair damp, her eyes just a little too bright with something that wasn't exhaustion. "You're home early," she said, surprised. He nodded. "The office closed sooner than I thought." "Oh," she hesitated. "You should have texted. I would have come home earlier." He almost smiled at the lie. Almost. Instead, he said softly, "It's fine, Clara." 2 simple words, gentle in tone. But Clara felt the sting beneath them. Not anger, not accusation, but resignation. Resignation was worse. He walked past her, the faint scent of graphite and cedar clinging to him. Clara turned slightly, watching him climb the stairs with a heaviness in his step she'd never seen before. Something inside her tightened. The guilt she had carried, buried under busyness and ambition, rose like a tide. She nearly called after him. Nearly. But cowardice dressed up as pride held her tongue. Later that night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He could hear Clara downstairs pacing. Sometimes he heard her stop by the bottom of the staircase as if debating whether she should come up and talk to him. But she never did. He turned onto his side, facing the window. The reflection of the room in the glass looked empty, even though both of them were still inside it. He closed his eyes and tried to remember the last time he felt like her husband, instead of a placeholder in her life. He couldn't. He thought love would make him stronger, but the betrayal didn't come like a knife. It came like erosion, slowly, relentlessly wearing him down until he no longer recognized the man he had become. Clara thought he didn't know, but he did. He knew everything. And yet, what hurt the most was not the affair itself. It was how easily she had let their life fade into something forgettable. Clara, alone downstairs, poured herself a glass of red wine. She stared at the surface, its dark sheen reflecting her face back at her, tired, restless, guilty. She pressed the rim to her lips, but didn't drink. She whispered into the empty room. "Why won't you talk to me, Ethan?" But the house didn't answer. And when she finally went to bed, hours later, sliding beneath the covers with a quiet apology on the tip of her tongue, Ethan was already turned away from her, his breathing slow and even. She reached toward him, her fingers hovering inches above his back. But she couldn't bring herself to touch him. She withdrew her hand. Ethan's eyes stayed open in the dark. The silence between them, once merely uncomfortable, had grown into something vast and consuming. A quiet force hollowing out the foundation of their marriage, and neither of them yet understood that silence has a breaking point. A point Ethan was slowly, helplessly approaching. The night it happened, the night that changed everything, was not dramatic. No raised voices, no suspicious messages glowing in the dark, no clues left carelessly on countertops. It was ordinary in a way that made it feel almost cruel, as if the universe chose the most mundane evening to finally end Ethan Marlowe's hope. Late October had settled over Seattle, the kind of cold that seeped through windows and coiled around the bones. Ethan left the office earlier than usual, feeling an ache in his chest he couldn't quite name. His firm had submitted a major design proposal that afternoon, and for once, he didn't want to celebrate with colleagues. He just wanted to see Clara. Wanted, perhaps foolishly, to feel a hint of the warmth they once had. By 6:30 p.m., he was already walking through downtown rain, misting against his jacket, in a soft, persistent drizzle. He checked his phone. No messages from her. He told himself it didn't matter. He told himself he just wanted to surprise her at the new restaurant she mentioned casually earlier that week, the one she said her team might try after work. He had no intention of spying. He simply wanted to see her smile again. The restaurant's windows glowed amber, fogged around the edges from the heat inside. Through the glass, Ethan could see the bustle of after-work crowds, people loosening ties, clinking glasses, laughing loudly. He searched for Clara's auburn hair, the soft fall of her scarf, anything familiar. Then he froze. She wasn't at a table of co-workers. She wasn't surrounded by a buzzing group from the office. She was alone, and Julian Keaton was sitting across from her. Ethan moved closer, rain sliding down the back of his neck, forgotten. His hand pressed against the cold glass like he needed something solid to keep him upright. Clara was laughing softly, intimately, the kind of laugh she used to reserve only for him. Julian leaned in, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear with practiced tenderness. Clara didn't flinch. She didn't pull, and then, without hesitation, Julian kissed her. Not a stolen kiss. Not a moment of drunken impulse. A kiss born of familiarity. A kiss that confirmed everything Ethan had feared, but tried to deny. The world didn't tilt or explode. It went silent. Eerily, painfully silent. Like water swallowing sound beneath the surface. Inside the restaurant, Clara's hand slid across the table, fingers intertwining with Julian's. Her expression was soft, unguarded, in a way Ethan hadn't seen in years. It wasn't passion that shattered him. It was the ease, the terrible, effortless ease. Ethan stepped back from the window, breath shaky, vision blurring not from rain, but from the weight crushing his chest. He didn't confront them. He didn't storm inside. Confrontation would imply there was something left to fight for. He walked away, one foot in front of the other. Slow, mechanical. It took him 17 minutes to reach his car, though he didn't remember the walk. He sat behind the wheel, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly he felt the tendons strain. For the first time in months, Ethan let himself cry. Not loudly, not violently, not the kind of grief that demands an audience. It was quiet, a soft, steady breaking. The kind of grief that only comes when love dies on its own, without theatrics. That night, he didn't go home immediately. He drove aimlessly along the waterfront, the city lights shimmering against the black waves. His reflection in the window looked like a stranger. Someone older. Someone hollowed out. By the time he reached the house, it was past midnight. Clara wasn't home yet. There were no more excuses left to invent. Ethan walked into his studio, turning on the desk lamp. The drafting table, usually cluttered with blueprints and measuring tools, felt too neat, too clinical. He sat down slowly, like someone lowering himself into cold water. He stared at the blank sheet of paper before him. For a long time, he didn't move. The house was painfully quiet, the kind of quiet that wraps around the ribs and squeezes. Then, with a kind of fragile resolve, Ethan picked up a pen. The first line came out shaky. "Clara, I don't know where to begin." He stopped exhaling, shakily pressing his palms into his eyes until stars burst behind his eyelids. He had spent years swallowing disappointment, absorbing tiny heartbreaks until they stacked into something unmanageable. Now, all of it spilled forward, slow but unstoppable. He wrote about the night she didn't come home, about the changes she pretended he didn't notice, about the lies she delivered with a smile that used to be his home. But he also wrote about when things were beautiful, about the early years, about the mornings she used to sleep tucked beneath his chin, about how he once believed she was the best thing that ever happened to him. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the lamp flickered, until the silence felt like a witness. At the bottom of the page, he wrote, "I don't blame you for changing. I blame myself for staying silent long enough to lose both of us. Tomorrow, I'll be gone. I hope one day you understand why. Ethan." When he finished, he folded the letter with deliberate care. No anger, no haste, no theatrics. Only truth. Truth written too late. Clara came home at 1:47 a.m. Ethan heard the door open, the soft thump of her heels being kicked off, the familiar rustle of her coat. She paused at the studio doorway, watching his silhouette in the dim light. "You're still up?" she asked gently. He turned toward her, eyes unreadable in the half-dark. "Couldn't sleep," he said. She stepped closer, her voice softening with concern she hadn't shown in months. "Ethan, are you okay?" He looked at her with a quiet sorrow she didn't understand. "Not yet." "I will be," he whispered. She kissed his temple, unaware of the weight in those 3 words. Then she went upstairs. Ethan sat alone for a long time after she left. Then he folded the letter a second time, then a third. And in that small act, he knew the next sunrise would not find him there. It would rise over a life he had already decided to leave behind. Clara Marlowe didn't find the letter until nearly noon. She had slept in. Unusual for her, but exhaustion had anchored her to the sheets after another late night with Julian. She woke with a heaviness in her limbs, the vague sense that something was waiting for her, something she didn't want to face. The house was too quiet. Ethan always made coffee before she woke. He always left a mug warming on the counter. He always kissed the top of her head before leaving for work. But that morning, there was no coffee, no sound, no trace of him. Just the letter. It lay centered on the kitchen counter, precisely placed like he wanted to make sure she'd see it. Her name, Clara, was written in Ethan's calm, steady handwriting. The handwriting she'd once told him she loved because it looked like someone who never rushed through feelings. Her stomach tightened. "Ethan," she called, forcing brightness into her voice. No footsteps responded. No door opened. No answer came. She picked up the letter with fingers already trembling, and as she unfolded it, the world she had constructed, the one built on distractions, excuses, and carefully maintained denial, began to crack. "Clara, I need you to read this slowly." Her breath caught. "I know about Julian. I've known for longer than you think." The words blurred instantly, tears welling before she could stop them. She pressed her palm to her mouth, inhaling sharply as shame flooded her body, hot and suffocating. But she kept reading. "I didn't say anything because I wanted to believe we could find our way back. I kept waiting for you to look at me the way you did years ago, to reach for me, to choose me. But somewhere along the way, I realized you already had chosen, just not me." Clara gripped the counter, her knees weakening. "The night I saw you together, I didn't break because you kissed him. I broke because the look on your face was a look I haven't seen directed at me in years." Her chest tightened painfully. She remembered that night, laughing too freely, drinking too much wine, letting herself enjoy Julian's attention because it felt good to be wanted. But she never imagined Ethan saw her like that. Never imagined he'd been standing outside watching the moment that condemned them both. "I'm not leaving out of anger. I'm leaving because I don't recognize us anymore. I don't recognize myself. I've been disappearing one small sacrifice at a time until now. There is barely anything left." Clara pressed her forehead to the counter, a sob breaking loose from the cage she'd built around herself. "I loved you, Clara, more than you know, more quietly than you needed. And I'm sorry that my way of loving wasn't enough for the woman you became." Her tears fell onto the page, staining the ink. "Please don't follow me. By the time you find this, I'll be somewhere trying to breathe again." And then the final line. "Take care of yourself for both of us, Ethan." When the letter slipped from her fingers and drifted to the floor, Clara knelt after it. Not because she meant to, but because her legs gave out entirely. She sank onto the cold tile, the letter clutched to her chest, sobbing with the kind of raw, primal grief she had never felt in her life. It wasn't just the loss. It was the realization she had never understood how deeply she had hurt him, never understood how long he'd been carrying the weight alone, never understood that silence could be a wound. She thought she had been careful. She thought the affair lived in shadows. She thought her marriage could survive her temporary selfishness. She was wrong. Terribly, irrevocably wrong. Her phone lay on the counter. She lunged for it, dialing his number with shaking hands, straight to voicemail. She tried again, and again, and again. On the fifth attempt, she left a message, her voice cracking halfway through. "Ethan, please pick up. I got your letter. I'm begging you. Just tell me where you are. Please, we can talk. We can fix this. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Ethan, please come home." She ended the call with a sob so sharp it sliced through the silent kitchen. Then she called again. Voicemail again. Voicemail. Her tears became frantic, messy, smearing the makeup she hadn't bothered to wash off last night. She looked wild, lost, like a woman who had woken up in the ruins of her own choices. She grabbed her jacket, keys, phone, everything, and ran outside. She drove to Ethan's office. He wasn't there. She drove to his favorite cafe. They hadn't seen him. She drove to the waterfront, the place he went when he needed space. Empty. She texted him 51 times. Emails, voicemails, missed calls. Nothing. It was as if Ethan Marlowe had dissolved into Seattle's rain. By early evening, she returned home, soaked, shaking, and exhausted. She dropped her keys, falling to the floor in the hallway. The letter was still on the counter where she left it. The sight of it broke her all over again. She crawled toward it, pulling it into her arms as though holding it could bring him back. "How did you hold all this alone?" She whispered into the paper, voice hoarse. "How did I not see you were hurting? How did I lose you before I even realized it?" The kitchen echoed with her sobs. Because only now, too late, did she understand Ethan hadn't left because she cheated. He left because she stopped choosing him, long before the betrayal happened. And now, the one man who had loved her without conditions had vanished quietly, gently, devastatingly, leaving her to face the truth she'd spent years avoiding. She didn't just break their marriage. She broke him. That night, Clara slept on the kitchen floor, curled around the letter like a lifeline. But Ethan never came home, and Clara Marlowe would spend years carrying the weight of a question she could never escape. What if he would have stayed if she had reached for him sooner? Ethan Marlowe vanished the way quiet men do, cleanly, without spectacle, leaving nothing for Clara to follow except the echo of her own regrets. No forwarding address, no credit card trail, no social media, no mutual friends who knew anything at all. Within 48 hours, he became a ghost. But ghosts don't die. They rebuild. He arrived in Portland under a bruised dawn sky, carrying only 2 suitcases and a portfolio case. He rented a small room above a bookstore, a space too modest for most, but perfect for a man trying to breathe again. He didn't talk about his past. He didn't mention Clara. He didn't mention the affair that gutted him from the inside out. When asked why he moved, he simply said, "Needed a reset." And the world believed him, because quiet men rarely lie loudly. He threw himself into work. Architecture firms, freelance drafts, late nights that were no longer born from avoidance, but from purpose. The loneliness was sharp at first, but it was clean, honest. He liked that. Months turned into a year turned into 2, slowly. Ethan rebuilt the parts of himself that had eroded in silence. He learned to smile again, to sit in cafes without scanning the door, to sleep without listening for another person's footsteps. And sometimes, rarely, he let himself wonder if Clara ever truly read the letter. But wondering was as far as he let himself go. He never went back. Clara Marlowe's world, meanwhile, did not collapse immediately. No, that would have been merciful. At first, she survived by pretending she was fine. She buried herself in work at the tech firm, climbing faster than before, driven not by ambition, but by the desperate need to outrun the guilt gnawing at her. Julian, the man she once risked everything for, drifted away within weeks once he realized Ethan was truly gone. He liked stolen moments, not ruined marriages. Clara learned that the hard way. But her career thrived. Promotions, recognition, invitations to speak at conferences. People admired her confidence. No one saw the cracks because Clara didn't break all at once. She crumbled slowly, quietly. The first appeared when she was named vice director. The announcement triggered a wave of whispers, old rumors resurfacing the late nights with her boss, the blurred boundaries, the promotion she earned, but that many assumed she slept her way into. She told herself she didn't care, but she did. deeply. The next crack came the day an anonymous email circulated through the company. A screenshot of messages between her and Julian from years ago. Messages she thought were deleted. Messages that confirmed the affair. Her reputation detonated overnight. The woman once praised for her leadership was suddenly the punchline in office group chats. HR called her in. Investigations followed. She wasn't fired, but she was quietly sidelined, an unspoken exile more humiliating than termination. At home, she drank wine alone on the couch, staring at the empty space where Ethan used to sketch in the evenings. The silence that once annoyed her now suffocated her. And on her darkest nights, she replayed Ethan's letter in her head, word for word, like a prayer she was unworthy to recite. I'm leaving because I don't recognize us anymore. I've been disappearing one small sacrifice at a time. Please don't follow me. She realized then, Ethan didn't just leave her, he escaped her. She had become the version of herself she always feared. Ambitious, admired, and emotionally bankrupt. A success story with a shattered center. Years passed. Clara's career recovered, at least on paper. She regained status, earned titles, rebuilt her image. But something essential was gone. Something no position, no salary, no apology could resurrect. The world saw her as a powerful woman, but she knew the truth. She had lost the only person who ever loved her without conditions, and she had no one to blame but herself. Ethan grew into himself. Clara unraveled from within. Two lives moving in opposite directions, connected only by a memory that one tried to heal from and the other could never forgive herself for. And though they lived just a few hours apart, the distance between them was immeasurable, because some people lose each other long before the goodbye is written. And some goodbyes echo long after the person is gone. 3 years after Ethan disappeared, life finally forced their paths to cross again. Quietly, without warning. In the most ordinary of places. A bookstore cafe in Seattle. Rain tapping on the windows. Ethan flipping through an architecture journal. Clara freezing in the doorway, breath catching in her throat. For a long moment, neither of them moved. It wasn't dramatic. It was devastating in its simplicity. He looked different, calmer, solid, restored in ways she had no right to witness. And she looked like someone who had learned to live with ghosts. Ethan didn't speak first. He simply nodded once, a polite acknowledgement, nothing more, and returned his gaze to the page. It broke her. She approached slowly, like stepping toward a cliff edge. Ethan, she whispered, voice trembling. He didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't recoil. Clara, he said gently, as if her name were no longer a wound. That hurt her more than anger ever could. She sat across from him, hands twisting in her lap. The cafe buzzed softly around them, but the table between them held a silence that felt almost sacred. I looked for you, she said. I know. I asked people not to tell you. Her breath hitched. Why? He closed the journal, fingers resting lightly on the cover. Because I wasn't leaving to punish you, he said. I was leaving to survive myself. The words were soft, not cruel, not accusing, just true. Clara blinked rapidly. Her throat tightened. I ruined everything, she whispered. You did, Ethan admitted without hesitation, but without venom. But we were breaking long before the affair. She looked up, startled. I withdrew. I stopped talking. I worked too much. You reached for someone who made you feel seen. It doesn't justify what happened, but it explains it. Clara's tears spilled at that. Because he wasn't rewriting history to absolve himself or her. He was simply seeing the truth she had spent years running from. Ethan, You don't need to apologize, he said quietly. That's all I've wanted to do." He shook his head. "The apology isn't for me anymore. It's for you." Clara pressed a hand to her chest as if steadying a fracture. Her voice cracked. "Do you ever think what we could have fixed? What we could have been?" Ethan held her gaze for a long time. Too long. Maybe. And then exhaled. "I used to," he said. "For months, I replayed everything, every silence, every small failure, every sign I ignored. I grieved the life we might have had." "And now?" she asked. He smiled softly, with an ache she recognized. "Now, I'm grateful we ended when we did." The words shattered her composure. She covered her mouth, shoulders shaking. Years of guilt, denial, and buried grief collapsed all at once. But Ethan didn't reach for her, didn't comfort her, didn't offer the closeness she once took for granted. He simply sat there, steady and kind, letting her break without trying to rebuild her, because that wasn't his responsibility anymore. When her breathing finally steadied, Ethan spoke again. "You were the hardest goodbye I ever had to write," he said. "But it saved me, and I hope someday it saves you too." Clara nodded slowly, the truth settling into her bones like cold rain. "I never stopped loving you," she whispered. Ethan's eyes softened with a mixture of compassion and distance. "I believe you," he said. "But love wasn't the problem. Courage was." A tear tracked down Clara's cheek. "And now," Ethan said, rising from his seat, "we finally said the things we should have said before everything fell apart." He paused, looking at her one last time. "And that's enough." He placed a few dollars under his cup and walked toward the exit. Clara didn't call after him, didn't beg, didn't chase. She just watched him go this time, understanding that the silence he left behind wasn't empty. It was closure. Rain followed Ethan out of the cafe, a soft drizzle that blurred the neon lights of the street and softened the sharp edges of memory. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. For the first time in years, walking away didn't feel like running. It felt like release. He paused under the awning of a small shop, letting the quiet settle inside him. Seeing Clara again hadn't reopened old wounds. It had revealed how thoroughly they'd healed. A strange peace washed over him. Gentle, grounded, unmistakable. He didn't hate her anymore. He didn't ache for her either. There was only an acceptance deep enough to feel like forgiveness. Not the soft, romantic kind people fantasize about, but the real kind. Heavy, honest, earned. Forgiveness as a severing, not a bridge. Inside the cafe, Clara remained in her seat long after Ethan vanished from her view. Her breathing uneven, her eyes swollen, her hands trembling against the wooden table he had touched minutes earlier. But the breakdown was different this time. Not violent, not desperate. It was quiet, mature, inevitable. She finally understood the worst truth of all. Ethan didn't forgive her to mend what she had broken. He forgave her to let go of the last piece of pain she still held over him. And somehow, that hurt more than judgment ever could. Clara stood and walked into the rain. Not to chase him, but to face the cold air alone. Her heels tapped against the wet pavement as she moved through the busy street. Yet she had never felt more isolated or more responsible for the life she now lived. This was the closure she earned, not a reunion, not redemption, but clarity. A lesson carved into her with years of consequence. Some loves don't end in flames. Some loves end in a quiet room, with two people finally honest enough to walk away. Ethan headed toward the train station, hands in his pockets, the city humming around him. The world felt lighter, as if someone had quietly removed a weight he had unconsciously carried across 3 states in 3 years. He thought of the letter, the one he wrote with trembling hands and a breaking heart. He wondered if the man who wrote it would recognize the man walking now. Probably not. And that was the point. He boarded the evening train, the windows fogged with breath and rain. As it pulled away from the station, the lights of Seattle blurred into soft trails. Ethan watched them fade, a small smile forming at the corner of his mouth. Not because he was happy, but because he was free. The past no longer owned him. The betrayal no longer defined him. Clara no longer haunted him. He had crossed the invisible distance between who he was and who he needed to become. And on the other side was not a woman, not a reunion, not a second chance at the same love, but a life that finally belonged to him. Hours later, Clara stood alone at her apartment window, watching headlights move across the soaked streets below. She pressed her forehead against the glass, letting her breath fog the pain. Ethan was out there somewhere. Alive, steady, whole. Not hers. Not anymore. Never again. And for the first time, she didn't imagine a scenario where he returned. She didn't fantasize about apologies fixing what years of silence and choices had shattered. She simply let him go. Not because she wanted it to, but because holding on had finally become more painful than facing the truth. She whispered into the empty room, "I'm sorry, Ethan." Not for him to hear, but for herself to finally speak. The words didn't change the past, but they changed her posture toward it. They settled into her chest like the final line of an overdue chapter. Closure wasn't something Ethan gave her. It was something she had to choose. And tonight, after years of denial, pride, ambition, and heartbreak, she did. Ethan's train cut through the darkness, carrying him toward a future unshaped by betrayal. Clara stood in her apartment, wrapped in the stillness she had once feared, learning to build a life without the man she had loved and lost. No dramatic reunion, no second chance, no promise left unbroken. Just 2 people who finally accepted that the end had already happened years before the goodbye. In the quiet of that acceptance, both of them, separately, imperfectly, beautifully, began again.